We're going to start again now. So the second part, it will be shorter and much more interactive. I'm not really going to talk at you very much more at all. I thought that it occurred to me just now during the break that really, if we're talking about lived experience, queerness as lived experience, then I am no more an expert than people in this audience in this topic. And also it occurred to me there's quite a lot of things which I didn't talk about, quite a lot of things which I could have talked about. So before I ask you any specific questions, I thought I'd just give you a chance to respond with anything. You know, some of you may be performers, queer performers, some of you may be queer activists, I don't know. Some of you may be queer theorists, some of you may be queer writers. Does anyone have anything in general that which has struck you during what I was talking about before, about this area? Yes.
Do you want to start?
No, maybe I can shout. Sorry. Yeah, it was just something that I thought about when you were talking about refusal, sort of affirmation and refusal, and I was thinking more about the difference between refusal and resistance. That for me personally, as you know, somebody who might define themselves as queer sometimes, or you know, kind of on that fluid spectrum, but also as an activist, queerness makes me think more about resistance than refusal. So it's not just saying actually we don't agree with, you know, your definition, but we perform a resistance to it that makes it a more active kind of definition, and that resistance is political, it's cultural.
I'm really glad you pointed that out, actually, because that I didn't really talk about resistance, and it's that, as you just said, you know, I wouldn't say any better than you, like that as an active performance of resisting something. It's not just one act, it's a consistent act. So yes, thank you, that's a really good point. Anyone else? Anything general?
Language is the key to everything here, because you just said that performance is language, and words you use are, when you use your words, you're performing. I think that is very crucial and very important.
Yeah, I
do agree with that 100%.
I think you're right that language is really important.
Because without that, you know, we can't do anything without language. As a human being.
I mean, I think that the way that bodies act and do things is also really important, but language is it's undeniably important in this.
You're absolutely right. Acting is important without speaking, but so does animals act as well. It's not only human beings, you see. That's what makes human beings unique, is the language.
Yeah.
Differs from animals, you know.
Thank you, yeah. Okay. Anyone else, anything general, or? Yeah.
It's really general, but you mentioned like dystopian queerness and utopian queerness, and I wonder if you could say something about the dystopian side of it.
So about people or theorists who have more of a dystopian perspective, it's not really dystopian is kind of glamorized from a kind of literary perspective, and is so ubiquitous as a genre now, I think, in literature. I have a literature background, so I can't not talk about literary stuff. But in theoretical terms, two queer theorists spring to mind. So Lee Edelman, who wrote a book called No Future, Queer Theory and the Death Drive, and Leo Bassani, who wrote an article or a book, I think a book called Is the Rectum a Grave? So you can tell from those two texts that there's more of the negation than the affirmation in those figurations. So there's a lot of psychoanalysis in those theories as well. But those are two texts you could check out if you're interested in that area. There are others as well.
No Future by who, sorry?
Lee Edelman, Edelman. Okay, shall I move on? Yeah, so I thought we could just have some fun. I'm not going to ask anything tricky here. So, because it's such a mobile and playful concept, I think, can be anyway, queer. So I thought we could think about how queer are certain things, how we could make them more queer, maybe. So whether you could make a case for something really not queer being queer, I don't know. So that's what I thought we could think about it. So just before we do, I've got some pictures for you to look at as well. Before we do that, just two quite general questions. There isn't a right or wrong, it's just I'm interested in people's thoughts. Can an object be queer? If yes, why? If no, why not? Is double drag possible? And what might it look like? So I'll give you a chance to have a chat amongst yourselves about that, and then we can see what people think.
What's a double drag?
Well,
excuse my ignorance. I'll find out.
Yeah.
Well, okay. No, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. No.
Like subvertising or something? Like when people...
I think objects are always in context. They're always in context.
Like
Objects out. Yeah. And that relocating objects queers them.
This is still
We are focused on gender sexuality. Everything's focused on sexuality.
What's the book? And then I think like drag is really like if it's just like trashing this together. I don't think that's ever what it's really means. Yeah, I feel like that's a really like minimal.
It's about
I just think like drag
defamiliarisation.
generally is about like
Become defamiliarised and they are inherently queer. And I think queer is about shopping into out of
I think the whole like
ways of
food thing
relationship.
only like only like gay guys dressing as stereotypical women be drag queens. And even RuPaul's it's like finally accepted to have to look like trans people. And then this, the UK series, is like the first like well they refer to themselves as straight but they're like bi. They've got a girlfriend. Yeah, so it's meant to be like really interesting. Maybe they could, you could have I mean, you could have like a guy who is only attracted to women who still like to do drag dresses.
So there's a distinction between weird and queer. And I don't know whether just weird in the world.
Oh yeah, if straight you just mean, yeah. Yeah, I just mean... Yeah.
time.
Yeah, this is then another issue.
Yes, yeah, that's interesting. So the objects that are symbolically queer can be dequeer. Because they've kind of taken the lesson of Adbusters. I mean, Adbusters kind of failed in the sense that it gave advertising some new ideas.
Yeah. It's just like dragons.
They do. Yeah.
Like one of the things in Judith Butler, like mentions those. Well, I think that's what it's like.
Johnny Cash, one piece at a time.
Yeah. And I just think it's
Although to queer something is I think it's related inherently to gender.
I assume he made yeah, but he tried to. Sorry, I'm getting into but like he tried to start bizarre. He like didn't like letting trans queens come into the show, and he tried to stop that from like has now succumbed to that. But like those are people who.
All right. Let's see what people thought then. So, can an object be queer? What do you think?
Yes.
Do we have a yes here? Anybody else?
Definitely.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting. Do people agree with that?
We have a yes for the same reason. So in context, it could be queer. In another context, no.
Okay. So the object can be, but it depends on the context.
Yes.
There's one very clear. Dildo, for example.
Well,
It's a queer thing. Not everybody accepts that.
Is it?
That's so straight.
Nothing funny about that. I have a friend, a female, she uses dildo. And nothing funny, she's a lesbian as well. So she's a very good friend of mine. I know her for 40 years. You know, nothing unusual about that queer tool. It's normal.
Yeah,
There's
I mean,
contradiction, you know.
But straight people use sex toys as well.
yeah. I mean, I think if you're going into the realm of sex toys, is that object in front of you inherently queer, or is the way that you use it queer? I'm not saying yes or no to that. I'm just posing these as ideas, really. But is it the human actor who queers the thing, or is it the thing which is queer?
Yes, we do it, like you said, we do it through language. We construct through language.
It's constructed by human beings.
Well,
Object itself is not a queer. It's a construction of it is queer.
I mean,
That's what Judith Butler might say. I mean, thinking about the materials themselves, I think I will come back to talking about that next week when we're going to talk about new materialism, or materialism in lots of different ways. Anyone else have any thoughts about objects? Going to show you some pictures. Yes.
I've heard people talk about something like psychedelics as being inherently queer because they not
That's really interesting. I
Can
haven't.
you repeat it?
So, this person said that psychedelics have been seen by some people as inherently queer because of the way they act on the brain, dissolving the ways that we separate the world. Was that right? Is that what you?
And sort of just like certain binary structures as ways of thinking about language, they have that sort of, they manipulate and have a certain effect on how it's forming in the world.
That's really fascinating. Where have you read that? I would like to read that.
I can't remember who it was, but there's lots of kind of psychedelic philosophers. Basically, he talked about these agents as ways of like fucking with consciousness in a way that like opening up to other ways of perceiving the world, break down structures.
I mean, it's it leads me into thinking about. I think some people may have talked about this. If you think it depends if you're thinking about queer as something which is inherently tied to thinking about gender, or if you're thinking about it as something which, as a destabilizing, disidentifying type function, which is what that sounds like to me. I really like it as an idea. And I don't feel precious about thinking about it. It has to be. We have to, those only binary structures that we're talking about here are ones of gender. I don't know. I think I like that as an idea. Queer psychedelics, or the queerness of psychedelics, or how psychedelics can queer things, maybe, or queer us. I don't know. It's certainly an interesting thing to think about. Thank you. Anyone else? Objects?
So we were talking about different, in the context of art, and how some objects are produced, again, in the context of art, so they're not meant to be in the world as like other objects, but they're kind of produced to be malfunctioned, or to have a glitch that is inherent, or something like that. So they're kind of queering their function, but actually they're not, I would say that anything that is art is not functional anyway in the world, in the the way we understand function. So that kind of playing on that.
So the function has been shifted somewhat, or queered, or maybe doesn't exist at all. It maybe exists for it. That's thinking about what art is. I don't know. That's very interesting. Art objects, or all art objects queer, or
anyone else?
We can think about that one. Okay. So what about double drag? Is that possible? Have you ever seen it? Is it possible?
Can I say something? I forgot that we said about the other first question still, that some objects that were created to be or to signify queerness, like the rainbow flag, can be completely hollowed out of its meaning when it's used for like a bank ad or some shit like this. So it completely changes its meaning.
Absolutely. So one of the Google image searches I was doing when I was putting these slides together was queer something or other, and then loads of rainbow images came up, and I thought, isn't it a shame that what has happened to the rainbow as a sign, it's been completely commodified.
You can even say that the hope of pride has been queered.
Yeah. People who identify as queer don't necessarily go to pride, because it's about a whole lot of, it's about, banks paying for big lorries, and it's just a money spinning exercise. So if you want to go to a queer event, you go to Black Queer Pride, or you go to there's the kind of marginal events, which are on the margin, which is where queer belongs, on the margin. But there's always a paradox to that, because as soon as something is produced, it becomes institutionalized. So that's why it has to continually transform, which is what I was saying earlier. Okay, what about double drag? Again, this is quite a playful question. Do you think it's possible, and what would it look like? Yeah.
I thought possibly yes, we were thinking about in a theatrical context, particularly things like early modern, so in Shakespearean theatre and things like that, when we've got men playing, because only men were allowed to play on stage,
Yeah.
and they're doing sometimes men playing women and then shifting back to men in the same performance.
Yeah, early modern performance. I hadn't even thought of that. Absolutely. And then if you've got only men performing, and then if you've got a woman, let's say in a Shakespeare play, you got a man playing a woman who's disguised as a man. So that could be a great example. Yeah. Great. Anyone else? Any different examples? Yeah.
I've got a friend who, she's a woman, but she performs in a drag troupe as still like female portrayals, but playing with like ideas of female sexuality and also like male gaze and taking it away from her personal day-to-day stuff and performing.
So it's like uber femininity, would you say?
Sometimes, or just like playing with like ideas of like drag culture and like not saying that just man can be a drag queen, like a woman can. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you're saying. I think you it's possible to you might perform a certain type of as a woman you might perform a certain type of femininity in one context, and then you might perform a different type of femininity on top of the femininity that you normally perform. Therefore, that might be a doubled kind of drag.
Yeah.
It might be. Yeah. Yeah.
Or don't they call that two-face or hypocrisy?
I think that has.
Not being honest.
I think that has a different. I don't think it necessarily needs to be seen negatively.
But men do that actually. I have a brother who pretends he's a misogynist actually. He pretends to women as he loves them and he fools women. And I don't do that, you see. I am honest with because I see women not as a woman, as a human being.
Good.
That's the difference between me and my brother.
I'm glad to hear. Thank you.
Sexist.
All right, I'm going to move on.
Helen, can I just, I wasn't going to say anything, but for some reason I'm thinking about Some Like It Hot. And
Go on.
Marilyn Monroe
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
Someone remind me what happens, because it's just been in my head. When you said double drag, I thought Some Like It Hot, only I just can't remember exactly what.
It's just two people pretending to be women.
Is that, oh, all right. I dreamed it, sorry.
But there is another film where the woman pretends to be a guy who's actually a woman, whatever.
So that could be
singing. Forgot
Yeah,
about it.
that could be another. That could be another example. I'm going to move on to some images. All right. So how queer are these images? Have a chat about that, and then we'll see.
But there's an indefinite Batman.
No, it's Batman and Superman. No?
Oh, is it?
Batman and...
What do I know of that? I'm going to go.
It's Batman.
But Batman doesn't
Like
look like a man.
I mean, he's a guy in a wetsuit or whatever. Because there is Batwoman, so there's the binary is there. You can't.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking. I was trying to think of like ways. Yeah, that's the thing. That's not right.
Yeah, what? Is it like a twist?
Then would it be correct?
He's just standing there.
Still be very phallic object.
So how pure are these images?
It could be more than just a design. Or if you have like a loads of phallic yeah, maybe that's just maybe that's just
She's not really mad. That's the weird. Like that.
But then, that's the idea,
and it's
isn't
just
it?
like
relatively gentle because
how old is it?
But is it from a film or something that was supposed to recognise?
sorry.
Is it from a film or something that was supposed to recognise?
So I don't know.
Even Butler performance
Clip art isn't supporting anyone. The third one is like
iki tane kalın onu belli değil işte.
50s stereotype.
Three adults? Yeah, right.
Unless she's like
It's only hairstyle. I mean, the just sort of legs, isn't it?
It's not really enough.
No, but like, is it? It's not like. It can't be relevant to that.
I don't know.
No, I know. Is it three women? No.
Well, she's got a crown. I don't think that's very. It looks like a 50s husband is tying out.
So.
Clip art as well. That one looks like a. Yeah. Yeah.
Colour is it?
Ya işte that's a norm, o normu gösteriyor.
It's like one
Kuyruğu olmaz. Abi kadın kişi Queer.
I think it's like the big I keep thinking it's changing.
How still adamın
No one's trying to catch you out.
Adam bakıyor. Soldan bakıyor.
Doesn't look like that when I cook
Bakıyor
it.
işte. Pasif. Bak sağda kadın var. Geleneksel bir kadın. Ev hanımı olduğu
He
belli.
is definitely gay.
Soldaki de adam bakıyor. Kesik bir şekilde de adam. Tabii heteroseksüel norma göre queer olmaz tabii.
I think this is
Okay. Oh, you may turn it off by accident. Hang on.
O zaman queer olur.
There we go. Or, 1 second. So, what did you think? How queer is the first image? Very?
Because is that Superman? I think, isn't it? The one on the left.
I think it is.
Yeah, the other one is Batman. I never seen a movie between Superman and Batman together. That's very cool.
You're not looking
Yeah.
at the right places.
So, in what ways is it queer?
I guess they're supposed to do active work, don't they? Like do adventures and all that. This is very intimate. Because they, you know, they're action people, aren't they? Batman is an action person, and so is Superman.
They're sharing an intimate moment.
What's queer?
Um,
Because they're kissing each other.
Yeah. So that's quite queer.
Yes.
And traditional, yes.
We were having a debate as to whether or not, like, how queer we thought the image was, because I personally feel like this is an image now that has become quite mainstream. That again, it's this idea of the acceptable queerness, and I feel like this is something you would see at a commercial gay pride parade, and again, it's incorporating it into this consumerism. And look, our superheroes are queer. Buy them. Go to these movies. Buy the figurines. And I felt, personally, my reaction was not that it's. I don't even want to say this sentence because you can't rate queerness. It's not on a scale. But for me, it didn't jump out as like the most queer in all of these. Whereas other people in our group were saying, yeah, that's really queer. Like I can see it straight away. Because it's bending this idea of what is masculinity, and these are meant to represent masculinity and heterosexuality and strong men, and then they're having this intimate moment. So it's bending what their purpose is, and in essence is queer as well. So we had, and then by disagreeing, we were being uber queer and having differences of opinion, which is all about.
I think they're all fair points.
A contradictory point here about the first picture. If they were Russian or Arab culture, it's not queer.
No.
Because they do kiss each other. I've seen them on television doing it.
I think that's a fair point.
Brezhnev was kissing the other guy.
I think that's a fair point. We have, but they are all American macho men.
It's not normal, is it?
Yeah, lots of people. Yep.
Like, as an extension of your point, I kind of wondered if these are becoming more mainstream. When, like, if queer were to become the mainstream, what would that mean for queerness?
Maybe it would mean that the queerest image would be number 3.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know. I think it's context dependent. Someone else had a point. Yeah.
We did speak about the context dependent thing. So first, it would be helpful to find the social norm of the society you're discussing those images in. So if it's this society, then, and just because the discussion, let's say, was queer, we will have plenty of disagreement. But number one, possibly from my perspective, doesn't seem that queer. Just partly because of what I think about the whole superhero thing in itself. So even if that is somehow apparently subverting it, doesn't really subvert it to me. 2 men kissing is no longer that subversive. And it's 2 men as well, and superhero is very masculine, etc., etc. So given the social norm that exists, from my perspective, it doesn't seem that like subversive or queer. It seems perhaps, I don't know, gay to some extent, but I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point. I think you were there first, and then you can come next.
I think in terms of the context, though, like it's not just any 2 superheroes. It's sort of the 2 poster boys in the golden age of DC Comics, and at that time, it's sort of irrefutable that it was wildly controversial notion that they could be anything other than the heteronormative poster boys that they were depicted as. So for me, in that context, it still has a kind of queer.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think they're both. I completely can see that they're both fair readings of that. It depends on whether you're thinking about them from the context that they originate from, or whether you're thinking about it in terms of now. And I think that's what the difference is between those 2 perspectives. Yeah, what did you think?
It was built on that, it's saying that like at the time it would have been very radical, and now maybe it wouldn't seem so much. And one of the questions we discussed in our group was what would be the contemporary example, and our conversation led to sport, like football is like super straight.
Yeah.
Whether there are people within that, there's an organisation that exists, and there's like crowds, it exists on TV. There's like no, it's like scarily straight. There's like no open gay footballers. It's a massive problem. Like it's awful. It's a really bad example in our society. So we talked about sport, but then there is a kind of queerness, or my perception of queerness within football as well. People talk about it within masculinity. So it's like, what would be, I think maybe more an interesting question is like, what's the contemporary version of that, and whether you can pinpoint that, because I'm not sure if you can now, and so that maybe has a conversation about queerness and whether you can, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I've kind of gone a little bit down.
No, it does make sense. Yeah, so that's something that we could think about. Yeah?
I just wanted to say that we think about Superman and Batman, which I'm no expert on, as a kind of macho, masculine, whatever, and the context in which they were created. But we're talking about 2 blokes wearing cat suits and like capes,
totally, yeah,
and like doing some crazy shit with superpowers. I mean, they're not straight blokes. Like, I mean, in the most kind of whatever, and also. The whole kind of comics, which I'm really not an expert on, but like was created in a political context of resistance and kind of you know, kind of talking about like how we, you know, ordinary people would never be crushed again and all that kind of stuff. So there's nothing straight about them to begin with. They're not ordinary guys.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Can I also just say something? Because, so, maybe it's also the way the question is asked, because you're not asking how queer are the people in the image, it's how queer is the image. And I think we were really struck, like, because the people in 1 and 2 are quite obviously queer when, like, if you think about it from this, yeah. But then we were really struggling with number 3, and we were trying to figure out what was happening in that image, and like maybe that in itself was the most queer image, because it's very very hard to identify what's in the oven. Is it a parody? Is it an exaggeration, or I don't know? So maybe because we were talking a lot about that.
Is it a pastiche of an image of a 1950s housewife? If so, is that the queerest thing? Yeah, you could say that. I mean, I wasn't trying to catch anyone out. I was just wondering whether anyone thought that was radically queer, that third image. And I think what you were saying would be if everything about queerness, and so if those 2 examples, number 1 and number 2, you've got those 2 male superhero figures kissing, then you've got this like but quite nondescript. We haven't really talked about this yet. I mean, we could talk about these. We're going to run out of time. Nondescript, what looks like a kind of triadic. Was going to say a couple, but no, a throuple, and of indeterminate gender. So that. But again, that is conforming to the norm that it is setting up, whereas that one we don't know. So yeah, I think that is a fair point, because this is a kind of designates a potentially queer setup of a relationship, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. So before we finish, does anyone else have any final thoughts about those images?
I have to just say one thing. It's because going back to it's the image rather than the people in it. That man there could be any gender.
Yeah.
Totally indeterminate as far as I'm concerned. Although the people I was speaking to didn't agree with me.
He's literally called Batman.
Yeah, I know that, but in that image, there's nothing to designate masculinity.
It depends if the characters in the image are the characters that we know, or are they just other people dressed up like that? I mean, they're fictional characters, so
it could be anything.
As I said, there's no right answer to those. All right, I've got some more images. Just before we finish, haven't got a lot of time left, I don't think. So I'll just show you these, and then you can just fire back responses at me. Which is the queerest object? There's no trick. Any thoughts? I've heard doily a few times. I'd say there's a strong argument for all of them, except for that one, which seems quite, I don't know, scary. Any thoughts? So whoever said doily, yes. You don't know what attachments that device has. We really need a video clip, don't we, for that? Any other thoughts? Who said doily? I really want to know your argument.
I think somebody else said it, but it's somehow it's an affectation somehow. It's not essential in the same way that clothes or maybe like facial hair might be, even if it's a put on moustache. something you can have for no particular purpose other
Yep.
than to kind of be there, really. So.
It's about the function, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
about it's a kind of superfluous function. It's like a frippery, and it's quite camp and kitsch as well. I love doilies. So yeah, I'm glad you said that. It wasn't just me being weird. Any other thoughts about any of the others? We've got some quite obvious appendages to add to oneself to create illusions of masculinity or femininity, or to accentuate masculinity or femininity.
Would it depend who was wearing them?
Could do, yeah, could do. I think what's interesting is that a lot of these, what's coming out is it's about the function of the object. It's about what happens to it, how it's used, how it's performed, maybe, how the object itself is performed. Because really, the fact that that is a sex toy is irrelevant. It's utterly irrelevant. It's actually about the fact that its function has been weird, maybe, or it wasn't intended to be used with a drill. So it's an interesting example, let's say. So, what about the lumberjack shirt? Did anyone think that was queer?
Is that implied because that's a reference to the Monty Python I'm a Lumberjack song?
I did not even think that. I did not think that. Is that a queer song? I mean, oh, that's just me showing my ignorance.
No, your youth.
I put it up there because I have a shirt like this and I wore it and someone said, "Oh, you're a lumbersexual," and I didn't. I thought, is this a new category that I don't know about? But I think it also designates a kind of, masculinity if you're wearing that kind of worker's shirt that people. It's kind of trendy, isn't it, to wear a shirt like that? Whether it's queer or not, I don't know.
I think it was queer at one point in history, which is one of the reasons that the Monty Python picked up on it, or Monty Python contributed to the queerness at that point in history, in the 1970s.
Okay. That's interesting. I didn't know. I didn't actually. I have to look at that, listen to that song now. All right.
It depends where, maybe not the shirt as much, but where you put all of these objects.
Yeah. Yes, that's a really good point. I used one of those as a fake beard once, an eyelash, a set of eyelashes. So that I thought that was kind of not what it was intended to be for. But okay, I think we've run out of time. So thanks for listening and for your participation. So I'm back next week. Look forward to seeing some of you then, maybe.
Thank you.
We're going to ask for announcements, which is something I've forgotten to do for so many weeks. So over to Shiri.
Seriously.
Okay,
sorry, I've got pizza all over me. So I'm Shiri from the Antiuniversity, and we're the kind of the group, the collective that organises these talks and loads of other stuff, and a festival every June, which I hope you all know about. But if you don't, you can go to antiuniversity.org and find out about it. And at the end of every Anti-University event, we do sort of announcements, because the Anti-University is not just about education. In fact, it's not at all about education. It's about activism and doing stuff together. So we always invite people to make announcements about actions or events or stuff that they're involved in that they want to let other people know about, so that we can all do it together. I can start by saying that on this Saturday, the designers and culture workers group of a trade union is coming together to kind of formalise and find ways that we can work together to defend workers' rights in the culture sector. So if any of you here is a culture worker, that can be a designer or an artist or a fashion designer or anybody who is producing culture in some way, join a trade union, because you're probably being fucked over by your employer, or you're probably not even employed, you're probably self-employed and being fucked over even more. So join a trade union and come to the meeting this Saturday at 2 o'clock, and you can find out about it on the Anti-University social media. Anybody else has announcements? Actions, events, stuff that is happening? Cool. Okay, well, get organised, people, because, you know, mutual education is great, but we need to sort the shit out of this. So, thank you. Okay, anyone who wants to know about trade union for cultural workers can also speak to me. Oh, which I should turn off.